Have you ever wondered why, despite doing everything right, he doesn't truly fall in love? You've looked in the mirror, dressed up, replied to his messages quickly, always been there, tried to show your best side, and still, he seems detached, confused, or even worse, uninterested. Carl Jung said that the ego is the center of our consciousness, and for a man, the ego is the lens through which he sees the world, makes decisions, and chooses who to connect with. A man's ego isn't just vanity, it protects, it's sensitive, it's fragile, and it's the doorway to his world of feelings. When you touch a man's ego in the right way, you don't just get his attention, you enter the most intimate and secret part of him, the part he tries to hide even from himself, that part that quietly begs to be seen, respected, and valued. And here lies the most powerful promise of this video. If you understand what truly makes a man fall deeply in love, you won't need to explain yourself, try too hard, or compete for his attention with other women. Because when you know how to touch his ego like no one else can, he falls in love. Not with you, but with who he becomes when he's around you. And that's the kind of love that doesn't fade with time. It's the kind of love that leaves a mark, that creates memories, that makes him feel he's found something rare, even if he never says it aloud. But to get to that point, we first need to debunk one of the biggest misconceptions we're told about men. The idea that compliments are enough. How often have you heard that you need to tell him how handsome, strong, and smart he is, that you need to stroke his vanity, that all men love to feel desired? There's a grain of truth in that. But here's a secret few women know. There's a huge difference between feeding a man's vanity and feeding his pride. Vanity is superficial and fleeting. Pride isn't. Pride is at the core of his identity. To touch a man's pride is to touch who he wants to be, or who he believes he can become. When you say, "You look good today," he smiles. But when you say, "I admire how you handle things that nobody else sees," he goes quiet. Because you've touched something rare, something nobody else has noticed, something he himself isn't sure about. It's at that moment that something inside him shifts. Because for the first time in a long time, he feels seen, not as an ideal man, not as a conqueror, but as a person who has value beyond what he shows. You start to occupy a special place in his soul. Jung said that we look for a reflection of what we believe we lack in others. And for a man, that reflection is incredibly important, because he grew up hearing that he should be strong, solve everything, be a pillar of support. But rarely does anyone ask him, and when you feel like you're not coping, who supports you? The woman who touches a man's pride in the right way is the one who, with a few words and small gestures, shows him that his strength isn't just in being invincible, but also in being human. Now I'm going to ask you a question. Are you ready to be that woman? The one who isn't content with being just one of many. The one who doesn't chase after men but attracts them. The one who doesn't shout to get attention, but awakens it. Because if you are, it's time to change everything you thought you knew about relationships. Because the path to a man's heart starts with something few people notice, his pride. Not the arrogant kind, but the wounded, quiet pride he's carried since he was first rejected, since he let his father down, since he was mocked by an ex, since he grew up wondering if he was good enough. When you value that man, not for what he shows, but for what he desperately wants to believe he can be, you attract him in a way that no physical beauty, no sculpted body, no quick message can. You become the most important mirror in his life, a mirror in which he sees his best version. And that's like a drug to a man's ego. But there's something you need to understand. Your words will only have meaning if they come from a woman who also values herself, who has worth, who doesn't give up easily. Because if you give everything without asking for anything in return, his ego doesn't feel the need to grow. And without growth, there's no connection. So, while touching his pride, you also need to touch your own. Allow yourself to observe your behavior. Are you praising him too much? Are you chasing him? Are you sending messages that go unanswered? Are you giving, and giving, hoping that one day he'll realize how incredible you are? Stop now, because what drives a man's ego isn't abundance, it's contrast. It's the space between what he wants and what he doesn't yet have. When you show yourself as whole, confident, with boundaries and presence, he feels it. And that feeling awakens something that was dormant in him, the desire to conquer, not a body, but an energy, a woman, a real connection. So the next time you want to compliment him, stop and think, am I saying this to please him or to reveal something? Am I touching his vanity or am I awakening his hidden pride? And when he becomes distant or silent, you'll know what to do, because a woman who truly understands a man's ego doesn't despair in the face of silence. She listens to it. She reads it. She understands that even detachment can be an invitation to a new encounter, if answered with wisdom. You're no longer playing a game for approval. You're creating a presence that leaves a mark, that remains even when you're silent. And now that you've started to look at men with new eyes, it's time to understand the second secret. Because a man's ego doesn't just fall in love when it feels seen, it surrenders when it feels it has conquered something rare. And that's what we'll talk about in the next part of our channel. How many times have you felt like you're giving too much? That you're doing everything for someone with love, with presence, with patience, and yet you remain invisible? You sent messages, started conversations, were there when he needed you, even if he didn't ask. And suddenly, he disappeared, became cold, distant, as if the warmth you gave him was too strong, as if your presence, so sincere, so complete, became a burden for him. It's hard to admit, but many women have gone through this, or are still going through it, and the feelings of guilt they experience are brutal, because they constantly ask themselves, maybe I was too intense, maybe I gave myself away too soon. The truth is that we live in an era where everything happens fast. Love has turned into a swipe, feelings into likes, and connection into notifications. And even the most mature, conscious, and deep people find themselves caught in an invisible game of who shows less. But the problem isn't intensity. The problem is the lack of space. Because a man's ego, as we've already said, thrives on tension. It grows in absence. It reacts to contrast, not because it's childish or cruel, but because the archetypal structure that supports it, the one Jung studied so deeply, needs the feeling that there's something to achieve. Think about it. A man might enjoy easy things, but he doesn't fall in love with what didn't cost him anything. What is given without effort, without intention, without merit, doesn't take root in his ego. He might even enjoy it, have fun, smile, but he doesn't get involved. Because a man's ego falls in love when it feels that something rare is within reach, but doesn't yet belong to him. He needs to pursue it. He needs to invest in it. He needs to feel that he's somehow growing in the process. When you immediately reply to everything, when you say yes, even before you're invited, when you're available without criteria, what was valuable becomes commonplace, and a man's ego, without even knowing why, starts to disconnect. But don't worry. This doesn't mean you need to become cold, distant, or manipulative. It's not about playing games. It's about understanding the invisible nature of desire. It's about creating space for him to move in your direction. It's about giving him the opportunity to feel his own initiative. It's about allowing him to recognize the value of your presence, precisely when it isn't obvious and constant. You might have experienced something similar, a relationship where everything was going well, until you started doing more. You sent messages, asked how he was, offered ideas, planned meetings, were always available. You wanted him to feel loved, but without realizing it, you took a position that prevented him from growing, and he started to relax. Then he started to drift away, and you, confused, blamed yourself. You thought you were wrong because you loved too much. But what if all that was missing was simply space? Space for him to feel like he had to conquer you. Space for his ego to understand that you are a gift, not an obligation. Jung said that all inner growth is born from tension. The same thing happens in relationships. When something is valuable, but not easily given, the energy changes, and a man has to do something to get closer. And that something activates the noble part of a man's ego, the part that wants to protect, care, invest, transform. When you allow him to feel your absence, when you pause, breathe, put yourself first, something in him ignites. Absence becomes presence, silence becomes a memory, and your image starts to occupy the space that was previously filled with ease. But there's something even deeper, something that many women feel but can't name. The fear of not being loved for who they are. The fear that if they set boundaries, they'll be abandoned. The fear that if they stop giving everything, they won't get anything. That fear is real, and it comes from the past, from childhood, when perhaps you had to give too much to be noticed. From the past, when being good was the only way to feel loved. From a pattern where you learned to care so that you wouldn't be abandoned. And then, without realizing it, you repeat it. You give too much, too soon, afraid that you won't be chosen. But the truth is that nobody falls in love with someone they didn't choose themselves. When you choose yourself, you radiate a vibration that a man's ego recognizes. Because a man, even without understanding it, feels more masculine in front of a woman who knows her worth. He feels he has to do something, that he has to grow, that he has to move, and that connects him to you, because by conquering you, he feels alive. He feels he's evolving, and that feeling is too strong to ignore. There's a simple story that illustrates this. A 50-year-old woman, after a painful divorce, started talking to a man who seemed different, well-mannered, mature, kind. In the beginning, she replied quickly to everything. She was available. She wanted to show that she was there, that she could be trusted. But gradually she noticed that he was starting to distance himself. Then she stopped, not as a game, but out of respect for herself. She started replying in her own time. She stopped being always available, and something changed. He started looking for her, investing in the relationship, asking questions, planning. The connection strengthened. Today, they live in a relationship based on presence and mutual respect. And it all started when she stopped running, to allow herself to be found. That pause, that space, that time, that's an invitation for him to awaken. And more than that, an invitation for you to reconnect with yourself. Because before any relationship, there's your axis, your energy, your rhythm. It's not about him loving you. It's about you loving yourself enough not to abandon yourself. And perhaps, at this moment, you feel that all of this makes sense, but you don't yet know how to apply it in your daily life. How to connect with your presence, how to calm the desire to please, how to cultivate the energy of someone who knows her worth, even if it isn't immediately recognized. This is where the inner journey is important, a safe space where you can return to yourself every day. So, I want to recommend something that has changed the lives of many women who follow our channel, the ebook, The Jungian Method of Jung. 5 minutes a day for inner peace and mental clarity. It's a practical and profound invitation to bring Jung's teachings into your reality, to nurture the emotional strength within you that transforms your connections. The link is in the pinned comment of this video, because ultimately, the woman a man will never forget isn't the one who gave the most, tried the hardest, or said the most "I love yous." She's the one who knew how to maintain her presence even in absence. She's the one who awakened in him the desire to be worthy. She's the one who, even in silence, continued to linger in his memory, because her energy left a mark on his ego, a mark that doesn't fade with time. There's a type of woman a man simply can't forget, even if life separates them, even if he meets other people, even if years pass, she continues to appear in his thoughts, not as a simple memory, but as an emotional presence that left a mark. And what's most intriguing, this woman wasn't always the most beautiful, the most available, or the one who said, "I love you," the most. She was, above all, the one who made him feel something few others make him feel: potential. It seems simple, but it's profound. A man doesn't just fall in love with the one who loves him. He completely surrenders to the one who inspires him, the one who invites him to be better, the one who awakens in him the feeling that his life has a higher purpose, and that she is part of that purpose. And that inspiration doesn't come from what a woman says, does, or shows. It comes from how she sees him, from how she looks at him, and in that look, he feels that there's a version of himself worth reaching. Now stop for a second and think, when was the last time someone saw you beyond what you show, beyond your routine, your image, your story? When was the last time someone saw your not yet, your almost, your I'm still becoming? Rarely, right? That's why that experience is so powerful, because we live surrounded by people who react to who we already are, but almost nobody reacts to who we're trying to become. What does that have to do with him? Everything. Every man has an idealized image of himself, a quiet I that he carries in his chest. He might not talk about it, he might even hide it, but it's there. The man he'd like to be, the career he wants to achieve, the respect he desires, the courage he doesn't yet possess. That ideal I is more than a dream, it's a personality taking shape. And when he meets a woman who sees that unrealized man, something inside him awakens, because she doesn't just accept him as he is. She's somehow saying, I see what you haven't yet shown, and I believe in it. And here's the most important point. It's not about building fantasies. It's not about praising him just to please him. A man's ego feels when something is said out of self-interest or for manipulation. But when you speak sincerely, when your perception is based on sensitivity and truth, he feels it. And moreover, he starts to act. Remember that man who was lost in life, who seemed unmotivated, aimless, passionless? Suddenly, he starts to rise, to think bigger, to act with greater purpose. And you wonder, what changed? What touched him so deeply? And perhaps the answer lies in something you said without noticing. Something like, you have a way of thinking that goes far beyond what others see. Or, it's amazing how you notice things that nobody else notices. Those phrases, simple at first glance, weren't just words. They were mirrors. Mirrors that showed him the reflection he wanted to see, but didn't yet have the courage to look in the eye. Many women constantly try to please with their beauty, their efforts, their dedication, but they forget about what has a greater influence, how they make others see themselves. And here I ask you, have you ever made a man see himself in a brighter light? Have you ever said something that made him look at himself with greater respect? If so, tell me about it in the comments. I'm very interested to know. Sometimes, a single phrase of yours can change someone's life, and that needs to be valued. But attention, this power isn't given automatically. It requires you to also see your own potential, because only someone who has learned to respect their own greatness can see greatness in others. A woman who constantly puts herself down, who doesn't recognize her strengths, is unlikely to maintain that inspiring presence. She might even see the best in others, but she'll ultimately demand quick returns, constant approval, or get frustrated when she doesn't get what she expects. So, before inspiring someone, inspire yourself. Look at the woman you're becoming. Be proud of your choices, even if they aren't loud. Be proud of the battles you fought, staying up when everything seemed broken, but you stayed. That's what gives depth to your energy. That's what makes a man look at you and think, she's not trying to change me. She sees me. She believes. A practical example. Imagine a man who works a job he hates. He feels stuck. He doubts his worth. The people around him say, you should be grateful you have a job, or at least you have a fixed salary. But you look him in the eye and say, I know you're living a much smaller life than the one you were born to live. That phrase, said sincerely, is an emotional bomb, not in a negative sense, but in the sense that it shatters defense mechanisms. He might not even respond immediately. He might even laugh, get distracted, but the words will remain. And every time he feels suffocated by the routine, he'll remember your words, and he'll start, even slowly, to move. That's what sets you apart from others. Most comment on what's already obvious. You don't. You name what hasn't yet been said. You're the echo that awakens in him the courage he wasn't ready to feel. And when that happens, he starts to associate his transformation with your presence, not because you saved him, but because next to you, he started to believe in himself more. Now think about what's more memorable, someone who liked you or someone who revealed you. What do you remember more? General compliments, or those words that made you see in yourself something you had never noticed? Exactly. The same thing happens with him. And here's a question for you. Are you ready to be that woman who gives not only love, but also vision? Who doesn't rush, because she knows that depth isn't built on speed? Who understands that she doesn't need to prove her worth, because she already has it? If you feel that you are, write I see in the comments, to confirm to yourself that you're ready to see another person beyond appearances. It might seem like a small thing, but when you write it, you affirm it, you declare it, you take a stand. The truth is that the strongest connections aren't born from necessity, they're born from recognition. And when a man feels that he's seen, not for who he is, but for who he can become, he clings to you in a way that he doesn't always understand himself. He misses you even before you leave. He wants to return even when he's nearby, because you're not just a woman, you're a portal. And in that portal, he recognizes himself, unfolds, builds himself. So the next time you look at a man, ask yourself, what am I seeing? Am I reacting to what he shows? Or am I responding to what he hides? Am I trying to fit into his world? Or am I inviting him into a wider world? You don't need to say all of this in words. Sometimes a firm and silent gaze is enough, because when your energy is pure, stable, connected to who you are, the other person feels it. He feels that he's in front of a rare person, and his ego, that invisible mechanism that governs many actions, surrenders, not out of a game, not out of lack, but because finally he has found a place where he can grow, and that's what he's looking for, even without knowing it, a place where his best side can manifest. And when he finds that place, he doesn't let it go, even if he tries, even if he fights against it, because the ego can't resist what makes it feel bigger, more whole, more itself. And in that space, true love is born. There's a certain moment when admiration turns into connection, and it's not when everything is perfect, and it's not when he's on top, with his life together, overflowing with confidence. Quite the opposite. The most solid connection forms when a man is at his lowest, and even then he feels that you still see him. When he's frustrated, lost, confused, and even then you believe in him. You don't pretend you don't see the mess. You see it, but you choose not to reduce him to that moment, and that changes everything. Carl Jung said that a man is transformed in conflict, that real change happens when inner parts come into conflict, when what a man shows no longer matches what he feels. When a man experiences that imbalance, he usually hides. He becomes silent. He leaves. Because more than the fact that he's not who he'd like to be, it's too hard to bear in front of someone who judges him. But when he meets someone who doesn't judge him, and at the same time doesn't spare him from the truth, a force is born that's hard to describe. It's the moment when he feels, she saw me, and she didn't run away. Now, imagine you're in a relationship, or starting something with someone. In the first days, he's charming, attentive, interested, but suddenly he starts to get lost. He doesn't answer like before. He demonstrates tiredness, perhaps irritability. You understand that something is wrong. He's disconnected, and everything in you screams for clarity. You want to ask, what's happening with you? But you breathe, look deeper, and instead of pressuring him, you decide to say something that goes against all the superficial formulas of conquest. I don't know what's happening, but I know that it doesn't define you. And even if you don't say anything right now, I see that inside you there's something that's still trying to find a way out. Such words aren't easy. They aren't predictable. They aren't comfortable even for him. But they have something that few can offer. A gaze without imposition, love without drama, trust without illusions. And the impact of that is enormous. According to a study conducted by universities in Rochester, USA, 68% of men between the ages of 30 and 55 stated that they would prefer to solve their problems alone than demonstrate weakness in a relationship. That statistic, which might seem like just dry facts, actually reveals something deeper: the fear of judgment, the fear that by revealing their flaws or insecurities, they'll lose respect. And what that survey also showed, and this is the most amazing thing, is that the same men, when listened to by someone who doesn't try to fix them, report a higher level of confidence, motivation, and desire for emotional connection. That means that a woman who knows how to challenge a man without belittling him possesses a power that she herself might not realize, because she awakens in him the desire to be better, not out of pressure, but out of inspiration. But why is this so difficult to do in practice? Because we've been taught to react, to interpret silence as disinterest, absence as rejection, and in relation to this, most women take two extreme positions. Either they remain silent to avoid conflict, or they pressure to extract an answer. But there's a third path, a path on which you don't remain silent, but you don't attack either, a place where your presence doesn't demand explanations, but gives clarity. And that clarity can be expressed with phrases that open doors, instead of closing them. Phrases like, I see that you've changed, but I'm not here to demand anything. I just want you to know that you don't need to pretend that everything is okay. Maybe you don't want to talk right now. It's okay. Just know that I'm not your enemy. What you're going through might be confusing you, but it doesn't prevent me from seeing you as you are. Those words act as a light in a dark room. They don't intrude. They illuminate. They don't pressure. They invite. And here's what might surprise you the most. Men remember those words, even if they don't answer, even if they close off, even if they don't know how to thank you, because it stays in their memory, not the words, but the emotional impact. They might not even know why they like you, but deep down they know it's because you made them feel that even on the worst days, there is a place where they don't have to defend themselves. I'll tell you a real story. A 47-year-old man, director of an international company, married for over 15 years. Being in a professional and personal crisis, he considered divorce, not because of a lack of love, but because he felt that he had lost his identity, that he had failed as a man, that he was no longer the husband his wife deserved. He had already written an emotional farewell letter. He was ready to send it. But that evening, his wife did something unexpected. Instead of confronting him, she said, "I know you're at war with yourself, and I can't win that war for you. But I want you to know that even if you lose everything, you'll still have me. Not for what you do, but for who you are. Even when you forget about it." He cried. For the first time in many years, he cancelled the delivery of the letter. He asked for time to rethink his life. And after a few months, they started over, not from where they left off, but from a more truthful place. This is rare, but possible. And before you think that this is a privilege for married women or those who are already close to a man, let me tell you something. That energy can be transmitted from the beginning, in a conversation, in a gaze, in a behavior. When you aren't trying to be better than him, but believe that he can be better than he is now, it's magnetic. And do you know what happens when you issue a challenge with respect? He feels safe, safe to try, safe to make mistakes, safe to say, "I don't know how to do this, but I want to try." And when a man says that, he's not just opening up, he's surrendering, because he understood that he can grow next to you without losing himself. Jung said that a true encounter between two people happens when one of them is a mirror that reflects not what the other shows, but what he hides. Do you want to be that mirror? Then here's an invitation for you. The next time he's distant, don't try to pull him towards you. Be quiet, but present. Let the silence speak for you. And if you want, say something simple, but memorable. When you're ready, I'm here, not to fix you, but to walk with you. You'll be surprised at what such a position can provoke. And if this has already happened to you, if you've already experienced how a man grows thanks to your silent trust, tell me about it in the comments. Share your experience. Your story can inspire other women who at this very moment feel that they've lost control, and perhaps it's not about control, perhaps it's about trust. The deepest love isn't born from perfection. It's born from mistakes, chaos, uncertainty, when we still choose to see the other person behind all that mess. And that's what a man's ego wants most. Someone who sees not only who he is, but also who he can still become, not as a demand, but as an invitation, as family, as hope. There's something most people don't understand about a man's ego, and perhaps even men can't name it. A deep desire to become indispensable, not in the sense of dependence, but in the sense of purpose. Every man, deep down, wants to feel that his presence has a real impact on someone's life, that he's not just taking up space, but building something meaningful. And when he meets a woman who allows him to feel that way, as a link, as a presence that matters, as a force that adds, that connection becomes virtually unbreakable. But there's one detail. He must believe that he conquered that role and not received it out of a lack. What does this mean in practice? That if you want to deeply touch a man's pride, you need to give him the opportunity to feel that he's contributing. Even if you're perfectly capable of opening a glass jar, solving a problem, making a decision on your own, if you want him to be emotionally involved, give him the opportunity to be helpful. It's that simple. Not because you need it, but because you value that gesture. In modern relationships, that space has almost disappeared. We live in an era where female independence, which is a historical and legitimate achievement, is sometimes misinterpreted. Some women, afraid of seeming weak, block any gestures of help. They believe that asking for something is a sign of weakness, and that accepting an offer is submission. But they forget that allowing someone else to contribute isn't losing power, it's creating a connection, because it's in giving that the ego finds meaning. And when a man feels that his energy, protection, and attention have value, he stays. Want an example? A mature, experienced, successful woman didn't need anyone to solve her problems. She did everything herself, but over time, she realized that giving space to another is also a manifestation of emotional intelligence. She started saying simple things. Could you help me with this? I'd like to hear your opinion. You know I feel calmer when you're around. Small phrases, but full of meaning. And the result wasn't long in coming. The man she was in a relationship with, who previously seemed insecure, distant and confused, started to behave more confidently, started to turn to her more, to take initiative, not because she became less valuable, but because he felt he occupied a real place in her life. This place isn't built with empty words. It's built with conscious actions, pauses, a quiet invitation that says, "I trust your presence," and that awakens something ancient in a man's ego, the archetype of the protector. Jung spoke of archetypes as universal patterns of behavior that dwell in the collective unconscious. And one of the strongest for men is the archetype of the hero. He needs to feel that he's saving something, even if only symbolically, that he's caring, providing, offering something important. But attention, this space isn't created with manipulative strategies. It's not about pretending that you need help. It's about recognizing the value of allowing him to manifest his strength. A sincere gesture, such as agreeing to let him drive you home, teach you something, take care of you in a delicate moment, has a much greater impact than any words. And what's most impressive is that the stronger and more confident a woman is, the more powerful that gesture is, because he understands that he's being invited not out of necessity, but out of your own desire. And that's gold for his ego. It's at that moment that he surrenders, because he's not being tested, he's not being demanded of, he's being recognized. But there's one more key, and perhaps it's the most counterintuitive of all, knowing how to disappear at the right moment. Yes, disappear. Easily step back. Create absence, not as punishment, not as a game, but as an affirmation of your identity, because a man's ego recognizes the true value of your presence only when he has the opportunity to feel its absence. As long as you're always there, ready, available, predictable, he doesn't trigger the mechanisms that make him fight for something. And, as we said earlier, the ego moves in tension. It needs contrast to awaken, silence to reflect, absence to remember. Jung said that individuation, the process of becoming who someone is, necessarily goes through separation. And in love, this also applies. Distance creates perspective, and only in perspective does he start to hear your words more clearly, to feel your energy, to remember how you looked at him, as no one else had looked. This doesn't happen while you're still there. It happens when you leave with dignity, without shouting, without resentment, without drama. And at that moment, if you've managed to truly touch his ego, your absence will become unbearable for him, not because he needs you, but because he understands that you were a mirror for him, not a mirror reflecting who he was, but who he could be. And that's the reflection he loses when you leave. And what's most amazing, it's at that moment of loss that he decides to return, not to repeat what was, but to try to build what he hasn't yet been able to achieve, because he understood, he saw, and now knows that what you offered him wasn't anything ordinary. It was rare, it was reliable, it was challenging, it was real. But all of this only works if you've taken care of your presence beforehand, if you've learned to leave without feeling guilty, to let silence do what no message can do, to trust that your energy has already said everything that needs to be said, and that your absence is now a new invitation. You don't need to run after him or prove your worth. Your role isn't to convince someone that you deserve to be chosen. Your role is to remind yourself every day that a woman who sees a man beyond appearances, who challenges him with love, who inspires him without demands, who lets him go with respect, is a woman who is unforgettable. And if he returns, it's only because he realized this. And if he doesn't return, it's because he wasn't ready to become who you already saw in him. Is it hard? Yes, but it's liberating. And perhaps now, after all this journey, after everything we've said about how to touch his pride, create space, reflect his ideal, challenge with respect, and finally, disappear with elegance, perhaps you're now wondering, how do I apply all of this in my daily life? How can I transform this knowledge into real actions and sincere conversations, into deeper connections? Because knowing all of this is important, but living it is what changes life. So, in the next video, I'll show you exactly how to transform this knowledge into emotional, strategic, and fully applicable steps, so that you not only understand men, but also become a woman who changes the way they love. You've reached this point, and that already says a lot. It says that you no longer want superficial relationships. It says that you're tired of repeating the same patterns. It says that deep down, you know that true love requires more than strategies. It requires awareness, it requires emotional maturity, it requires a deep dive into how you see yourself and how you allow another to unfold before you. So, the last part isn't just a conclusion, it's a starting point. A real invitation to ensure that everything you've heard so far doesn't remain just a theory, but turns into practice, into life, into real connection. Now the question arises, how do you put all of this into practice? How do you become that woman who so subtly, so strongly, so transformatively touches a man's pride that he simply can't forget you? Let's develop a plan together, not with magic formulas, but with awareness, feelings, and determination. Step 1. Respect your energy. Before offering your presence, before inspiring someone, inspire yourself. Every day, dedicate 5 minutes to silence and yourself. Not to solve something, but to hear yourself. Put on instrumental music, close your eyes and ask, how do I really feel?